How does Netflix's Vikings Valhalla relate to the original history series? Is the same creative team making the sequel? Will it be historically accurate? Keep watching for all those answers and a lot more. Just when you thought you had a handle on all the various descendants, relatives, and acquaintances of Ragnar Lothbrok, the story of Valhalla jumps more than 100 years into the future. According to a Netflix press packet, the sequel series begins in the year 1002, kicking off with a particular historical event. That could be the Viking attack on London Bridge led by Olaf Haraldsson in the trailer, but historically that event didn't take place until several years later, if it happened at all, so it's more likely something else. Another candidate is the St. Brice's Day massacre, in which King Aethelred II ordered the slaughter of all the Danish Vikings living in English territory, hoping to put an end to years of Viking raids. Instead, King Aethelred's actions provoked the Danish king Sweyn Forkbeard to increase the frequency and severity of his attacks, eventually forcing Aethelred and his queen Emma of Normandy into exile. Considering many of the main players in the St. Brice's Day massacre are confirmed characters for the first season of Vikings Valhalla, seems like a strong dramatic contender to kick off the series.
The entire north is threatened by the English king.
Whatever event marks the beginning of Vikings Valhalla, prepare to see a significantly more complex political landscape than in Vikings. In the Netflix press packet, showrunner Jeb Stewart explains what the world will look like. The Vikings had been living in the British Isles and had settled into big areas called the Danelaw. The Danelaw had started to grow, not just with Danes, but also with Swedes and Norwegians and folks from all over Scandinavia. Saxon nobles were afraid that if you went out another generation, suddenly there wouldn't be any difference between Saxons and Vikings. The Vikings on Vikings spent most of their time engaged in power struggles, but there was one man in control behind the camera. Creator Michael Hurst wrote every single episode of Vikings, so perhaps it's not surprising that he'll be less involved in the sequel series. Hurst will still be an executive producer alongside Vikings vets Morgan O'Sullivan and showrunner Jeb Stewart. Stewart, you may know, is one of the co-writers of Die Hard. Given the time jump, we likely won't be seeing any of the familiar faces from Vikings unless they appear as ghosts, visions, or in flashbacks. Fortunately, the same person who worked as casting magic for Vikings is back for Valhalla. Frank Moiselle returns as casting director and has filled the new series with cast members O'Sullivan says bring a fresh, youthful energy to this story. Also back is Vikings historical consultant Justin Pollard. He will be the one digging into the obscure history being explored by the show, working to make sure it's as accurate as possible. He spent months consulting with Stewart on the new series before writing even started. As for the shooting location, Vikings Valhalla is being shot in Ireland, just like the original series, so there will be the same breathtaking scenery fans expect to see. Vikings had one indisputable lead character, Ragnar Lothbrok. Vikings Valhalla, though, will have three central characters sharing the spotlight. Legendary Viking explorer Leif Erikson, pagan shield maiden Freydis Eriksdottir, and the Norwegian prince and Viking berserker Harald Sigurdsson. Brother and sister Leif and Freydis will meet Harald for the first time during the events of the series. Stewart says he chose to build the story around these three characters because of what they represent. In the Netflix press kit, he says, "For me, they each embody different elements of the Viking spirit, bringing Leif and Freydis, who are both Greenlanders, to Norway, to Kattegat, and embedding them in the Viking story just seemed a very natural place to go." Centering Vikings Valhalla around three characters will also help offer a broader perspective on the culture and characters, which will be important to help modern viewers relate to the story. Stewart added, "It's a timeless story. In a strange way, if you take massive violence out of the equation, the Vikings embody some of the elements that we still most want for ourselves. Our characters are dealing with relationships and issues that are just as relevant today as they were 1,000 years ago, and those stories will always excite and captivate us." While some suspected that the title Vikings Valhalla meant a glimpse into the Viking afterlife, we now know that the title of the series isn't necessarily about that sort of life after death. The title Valhalla was chosen because the show depicts the events that lead to the end of the Viking Age, which historically ended in 1066. Stewart said, "We played with a lot of new titles and kept coming back to Valhalla because the idea of the show is inherently tied to the end of this era. It's all about showing this incredible time in history and how all things eventually come to an end. But don't get too worried just yet about the end of the Vikings era. Since the series begins in 1002, the show has more than 6 decades to play around with before the Viking Age comes to a historical close. And it's not like any period of history ever came to a neat stop, so we wouldn't worry about running out of Viking legends to dramatize anytime soon." Frida Gustafsson will be playing Freydis Eriksdottir, the daughter of Eric the Red and sister of Leif Erikson on Valhalla. In an uncanny coincidence, Gustafsson's real-life father is also named Eric, and her real-life brother is also named Leif, and it doesn't end there. Gustafsson's real-life nickname is also Freydis. No wonder she really threw herself into the role, reading multiple books to prepare, with her favorite being Valkyrie, the Women of the Viking World. Gustafsson was also an accomplished writer prior to the show, giving her an advantage during the scenes on horseback. We can only hope she also did some strength training too, since Gustafsson's costume is actually the heaviest of all the lead characters on the show. There are more than 2,700 hand-cut leaves that decorate her shield maiden armor. A big part of bringing the characters to life on Vikings was the intricate costumes designed in the show's final few seasons by costume designer Susan O'Connor-Cave. Cave is back for Vikings Valhalla, using her keen eye for detail to enhance the story. For example, while the high-neck dresses that Emma of Normandy wears on the show are indicative of her station and royal bearing, they're also meant to act as her armor. They convey that although she doesn't charge into battle like a shield maiden, she's still a warrior in her own right. Similarly, although the devout Jarl Korra holds no official position in the church, the silhouette of his costume is meant to evoke a cassock, a garment traditionally worn by certain Christian clergy. Cave also incorporated the Vikings' cultural and religious shifts into her costume designs for Vikings Valhalla. You may notice richer colors and more chainmail in the Vikings' costumes, meant to reflect their transition to Christianity. Color and texture also play a big role in enhancing the characters, with the Greenlanders' costumes meant to reflect their connection to the earth, and the Vikings' costumes overall appearing more organic, favoring wools, linens, and furs. The Saxons, meanwhile, will wear mostly velvets, silks, and brocades with heavy embellishment, highlighting the stark differences between the cultures. While Vikings developed a reputation for playing a bit fast and loose with history, the truth is a bit more complicated than that. Justin Pollard served as historical consultant on both Vikings and Vikings Valhalla, making him responsible for all the research that helped inform the storylines. But researching Viking history isn't as simple as just referencing old texts. As Jeb Stewart explained in his Netflix interview, there are a million different ways to look at history. We don't know a whole lot about the original Vikings. They didn't have a written language, so the documentation is tricky. They left us the sagas, but the sagas were written 200 years after the end of the story, and they were written by Christians. We know archaeologically what has been dug up, but we're still discovering new things about Viking culture. Obviously, it's tricky to make an authentic show about a group of people whose history was only written down centuries after the fact, and even then, only by people outside their culture. There's no simple, correct version to defer to, which means that many creative decisions are based on historical interpretations rather than historical facts. Still, the team behind Vikings Valhalla did their best to be as true to history as they could. Stewart says, "Ultimately, we've made an authentic show. Sometimes we've moved dates or characters around a bit, but the historical pieces are all there." While things did begin to shift by the end of the series, the original Vikings mostly pitted the pagan Vikings against the English Christians, with only isolated characters like Athelstan expressing any interest in bridging that gap. However, the series does feature the conversion of the Viking warrior Rollo to Christianity, at first in name only, but later on in practice. 100 years later, the religious landscape in Europe looked very different, with many Vikings having followed in Rollo's footsteps and converted to Christianity. Vikings Valhalla will explore the conflict between the pagan and Christian Vikings, with both sides being well represented by the Viking families in the series. Of its three main characters, Freydis and Leif will both still worship Odin and the old gods, while Harold is a Christian. More broadly, while the Greenlander Vikings will still be pagan, the Norwegian and Danish Vikings will have largely converted to Christianity. According to Stewart, the two groups will clash in Vikings Valhalla in a religious civil war.
Christians are my true enemy, and you are mine!
He said in the Netflix press kit, "It's a long and somewhat complex timeline, but when our story is set, Christian Vikings were mostly very sincere, very tough, and very focused on absolute and total conversion to Christianity, or violently wiping paganism off the map entirely." Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Looper videos about your favorite shows are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.